Quote, "There is only one thing a writer can write about, what is in front of his senses at the moment of writing. I am a recording instrument. I do not presume to impose story, plot, continuity, insofar as I succeed in direct recording of certain areas of psychic process. I may have limited function. I am not an entertainer." End quote. The technique he would apply to Naked Lunch consisted of typing up a page, then cutting out sections, individual sentences, and even words with a razor, and rearranging the jumbled pieces into a new order. Going all in on this technique, he found his way back to his previous stories and brought them back employing the same method, the cut-up technique. And what came about was something dreamlike, difficult to understand, and wholly fascinating. To William Burroughs, the cut-up technique introduced an element of randomness that changed everything. Instead of writing being like a still life or like a simple rendition of events, writing with the use of cut-ups was like discovering a radiance of life and writing once again. It explored a sensory process that was going on all the time, and Burroughs saw it as being able to extend the limits of literature. It was like when you're reading a newspaper, but you aren't able to remain on one column. Instead, you jump from column to column, taking in bits and pieces of each story. Then imagine that you also start reading from the column of the paper sitting next to you. The story you compile in your mind with this exercise is one wholly different and might not even make sense, but it does create something original and new. The cut-up technique also bore the power to juxtapose what was going on and what you were doing at the time and what was happening around you. In a sense, it seemed to be able to bend reality. Now, before Burroughs, French painter and sculptor Marcel Duchamp employed the cut-up technique years before by placing 4 unconnected writings in 4 divisions of a square. And before Duchamp, mathematician and physicist John von Neumann introduced the cut-up principle of random action in his theory of games and economic behavior. Following his stint in Tangier, Burroughs devoted himself entirely to cut-ups, putting in 8-hour days of manic creation. A fellow Beat Generation writer, Brian Geeson, gave him a couple of correspondence baskets and file cabinets, and Burroughs would spend his days cutting strips from his favorite writers and his own writing, then randomly rearranging the strips while looking away and typing up the result. He even cut up his letters to friends, so that a December letter to fellow writer Paul Bowles went like this: "Smashed and tumbled, the thirsty off once more, sums of dwellings and darkness across the somewhere in that masonry of shattered fragments, castle host set. Goodbye to their desert, the riot-blown tombs, disemboweled houses marking the site. Black hinterland garden with a meaning of dust." This text, Burroughs would explain, was a cut-up arrangement of a passage by British novelist and poet Lawrence Durrell. Paul Bowles didn't see the cut-up method as a language for narration, but more a language to alienate the reader, which didn't make sense. You could read it, you could force yourself to go from word to word, but you came out at the other end no happier and no wiser. It was clear to Bowles that Burroughs was under the influence of Brian Geeson, who, having allied himself with Burroughs, had a stake in his reputation. You see, Geeson had a strong vested interest in the cut-ups, stating that writing was 50 years behind painting, which to Paul made no sense at all. It was like saying that an orange had a better form than an apple. You looked at a painting in the same way that you looked at any object, but writing still had to be read on a printed page, left to right, line by line, word by word, and if the words had no meaning, the reader was lost. Why not use the Cyrillic alphabet? That would be the ultimate cut-up. Well, anyway, for Burroughs, the cut-up was the great breakthrough he had been searching for. So what if people couldn't read it? They would get used to it. After all, any advance in the arts is always at first misunderstood. Furthermore, he understood the value of creating anti-writing.